You're watching Thorin's YouTube channel. Please seek professional help.
Now, NAVI, Natus Vincere, has won the Esports World Cup, the first ever edition of that tournament. Remember last year, it was actually called Gamers 8 when it was won by Vitality. They've already launched the Esports World Cup brand now, even though you might be confused because they did, as the news will say, you will have seen said they bought the brand EWC, which was a very famous unofficial major in a number of games in esports history in the 2000s and early 2010s. Actually, apparently, according to Richard Lewis, they only basically bought that brand to sort of put it on the shelf and make sure no one uses that brand. And there isn't any confusion that was called Esports World Cup, although that had the S in, not just EWC. And then this one just gets to start. And bizarrely, they're not trying to build on the legacy of the old one, which, if people don't know, was one of the all-time great tournaments in esports and had a very different sort of ethos and, let's say, origin story to anything Saudi run. Now, as a little detail on the side, if you're wondering, is all this Saudi shit going to continue on, Thorin? Like, what's the future for all this? Let me just put it this way. The teams and the players, unless they have some high-minded moral objection, are going to want to play in these tournaments, these Saudi tournaments, even if, by the way, the actual tournament setup isn't as good as certain other tournament organizers that we all think are better, because let's just look at this concept. The winner of this tournament, NAVI, got $400,000 for first. Now, first of all, winning the major only gets you $500,000. So this tournament prize money rise right up there with the major. Then consider that $400,000. Well, back in the day, the early majors until 2016 used to only give you $100,000 only for first place. So that means Pronax's 3 major wins over 2013 and then in 2015 only got him $300,000. Aleksib just won $400,000 in one tournament just for winning the Esports World Cup. Similarly, if you want to contrast in the modern day how much money this is, G2 Esports, who finished second here, got $175,000 for finishing second. Meanwhile, just before the player break, they won IEM Dallas with Stewie 2K, and they got $100,000 for winning that tournament. So they get $75,000 more for coming second at this tournament. So absolutely, everyone's going to be dialed in on this tournament. This isn't like WSG, where it had the enormous prize money, but it had that weird like national-based thing where you couldn't have like foreign players, etc. That obviously scuffed that and meant it never could get to the same level. That was actually trying to be like the World Cyber Games long ago, but obviously in the modern day, everyone has mixed rosters teams. I think this is going to become a huge tournament. Hopefully, this is just a test, and next year has a much more expansive format, because essentially it was just one BO3 and then you were just in the playoffs, or you were the teams who played those weird BO1 playing to get the last playoffs. But I think this format was garbage. But at least the playoff bracket was the typical kind of playoff bracket you used to, single elimination CS. It was BO3s and we had some good games there. It was actually an entertaining tournament, I'd say. This video is brought to you thanks to Ridge. Now, when I was looking through their promotional materials, I saw that when they put sort of the company vision, one of the things they said in the beginning they wanted to do when they made Ridge was make wallets better. And you have to say, I actually think they succeeded. Like, theirs is super slim. It's way more efficient because it doesn't take up as much space in your pocket. Everything's nicely ordered. Get rid of unnecessary stuff. You actually figure out, why would I have all these extra little things I'm never going to use there? There's clips that make everything work. It's really easy to access everything. I actually do think they've succeeded. This is the best wallet I've ever had. I've used a Ridge wallet since 2020. So after 10 years and 2 million sold, I think they've nailed it. Like, if you don't know, look how slim it is. Like, I'll just give it comparison to different parts of my body. It's really, really small. It's really slim. By the way, I've put like 10 cards in there. You can actually fit up to 12. Obviously, it has like a stretchy component, so you can even put thicker cards than I have in. But if you put way less cards, obviously it doesn't stretch as much, so it'll still be tight like that, and it will hold the cards in. But then it's easy. You've just got the little area here. You just push, and you take whatever card you need out. There you go. On the back, I actually personally use this strap where I've got like my little, like, you know, bonus cards for the supermarket and things like this stamp card where you collect 10 and you get a free whatever, and put my money there as well. I just put the paper money there. You can also, by the way, on the back of here, put like an actual coin clip if you want to put like paper money in, to put things in. They also have a thing like on here where, this is my old one, where you can also get like a coin case. So you can see I would have put the coin into there, and then it goes back inside. So if you want to actually carry coins, I personally don't carry coins. I just give them to the homeless or whatever, and then I just keep the scale cash money, don't I? And most of the time, I'm just using cards. So if you get one, you get a lifetime warranty. It's mega sturdy, by the way. This is my second one that I got recently, but the old one I had, which is obviously a little bit more scuffed, because I used it a lot. I could still use this. I was using this until recently, until they offered me another one. I had this for 4 years. Very sturdy, you can see. Lots of different colours, 50 colours and styles. Really durable. You can drop it. Like, yeah, it might get a little scratch, but it's actually going to stay in very good nick, and everything's compact. So it's all going to stay nice. Stuff isn't going to go flying out. Also, as I pointed out in the past, they also wanted to level up more than just your wallet. So everything you carry, basically. So then they have a key case. This is really good. Like, I only have a couple of keys in mine. You can fit up to 6 keys. One thing that's really useful is, I don't know if you find this annoying, but when you have your key thing in your pocket, first of all, keys themselves aren't very nice in your pocket. I don't know, they stab into you, they stick out, you got a bulge in your pocket. Are you happy to see me? Or you just have a bad keychain, is what someone could say, right? This makes it really, really compact, all in one place. There's no jingle. That's me shaking it. 2 keys in there. Notice it isn't making a big... So it's also not really noisy, and it's really slim as well. It's also super small. So if you'd like to check out and get a Ridge wallet, I've really enjoyed it. You can get 10% off your order. Thanks to Ridge for sponsoring this channel by going to ridge.com/Thorin, as it says on the screen. Use the code Thorin, THORIN, for 10% off your order. In my opinion, the best wallet on the market. In terms of the run, let's go through NAVI's run first. So as I say, the format, well, by the way, as I show on the left here, I can't advertise certain things on YouTube, but if you check out my pinned tweet on twitter.com/x.com, it will always be the exclusive content and predictions that I'm doing for tournaments and a bunch of stuff that's only on Twitch and on my Twitter. So if you look at the format, it was a bit scuffed. They started out playing Furia, by the way, one of the easier opponents to face, even though Furia in theory is upgraded on paper. They're still not that dangerous a team, even though they did indeed win the BO1 playing. NAVI actually took care of them relatively easy, close first game, but they've been up and down on Nuke, easily won on Mirage. Look at this, 12 T rounds, so that was overall fairly easy. In fact, let's just check out all the results quickly so people can see them. Then in this one, b1t was one of the players who carried. By the way, Wonderful being really good as expected. GL being pretty good. Like, that's actually not even as good as he would be for the rest of the tournament. But these are the normal sort of like way you expect the players to break down. But the problem is, b1t's been way too good compared to normal. Normally, he'd be more at the Wonderful sort of level of numbers, maybe even slightly lower. This is way too high, like 107 ADR, plus 21 for the series. But admittedly, it was just Furia. Then that got them into the playoffs. In the playoffs, they got drawn against FaZe Clan. Now, you could actually argue that's one of the harder ones to get, right? I mean, sure, Vitality and VP both got a tough one there. Team Spirit, no one knew how good G2 would be. They actually had like kind of a scuffed early game over Mongols. It was very, very close. So you can maybe say Spirit got an easier matchup there. Mouse getting Fury is by definition the easiest because that was the worst team of the other one. They didn't even win their opening game, and they came through the BO1 thing. And amazingly, it actually was closer than you expect. Now, when NAVI plays FaZe, obviously this is relevant because FaZe was the team that people say was supposed to beat them to win the PGL Copenhagen image. Now, look, I don't think a result 3+ months later means suddenly that result wasn't the case. And now we can backwards check history. That was the expedition at the time. FaZe Clan was the better team at the time. FaZe Clan had beaten better opposition at the time. In fact, over the first 2 maps, you could even say FaZe played better. So I don't know on that one. I think people are always going to retcon history, sadly. But obviously in this one, you expect FaZe Clan to beat them. If they had beaten them, it would have been part of that narrative of Rain, like we got to keep smashing them every time, blah, 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 blah. But the issue here is obviously now NAVI's beaten them a couple of times, and now they've won like, 3 of the last 4 against FaZe, and the one other one was the one like right afterwards, basically, that was less important. So that's pretty big. It means in the head-to-head with FaZe Clan, NAVI's now beaten them. There's probably even an interesting discussion had of how are they beating them? What's making them match up consistently against a team that's supposed to be better under pressure, with more experience and a better squad and a better life? That's an interesting convo. But obviously the fact that they beat FaZe here is going to make people, even before they'd won the tournament, bring up the whole Fluke thing about the major. But this was a big time win because crucially you didn't even give them a map. Normally NAVI, it's really hard work and it's always 3 maps, it feels like, against top teams. Actually, to beat a top 5 ranked team and 2-0 them doesn't happen that often for NAVI. So this is a big time win, even though FaZe, yes, I would say over the last few months, you look at the results, they're not making finals anymore. FaZe is obviously on something of a downward slump and some of their numbers are going down. But at the end of the day, they're still pedigreed. They're still one of the better teams, still a top 5 team. Most people would say they would have been favoured to beat NAVI. So that's a big time scalp already. Then in the semis, this is already good because if Furia had somehow fluked it, I mean, no one's going to give you top marks for beating Furia, but you got to play Mouse. Now, Mouse is a team that won 2 big... They won 2 LAN tournaments right towards the end of the season, didn't they? And everyone knows the pedigree of this team. They are really good. If you put them in a scenario with no pressure, they might even be the best team in CS. Their problem obviously is when you put them under pressure or in big games, they don't always deliver, and sometimes some of their players fall away. They're quite young, they're inexperienced, etc. So I would say this is an interesting example of that, because actually Mouse destroy the opener. They absolutely smash on Dust 2, but then they get like beaten convincingly on Nuke, and then they get actually destroyed on Mirage, and people will know this core of Mouse, right back to the time they were Dexter, seemingly always thrived on Mirage. It was always a map that was great for them, and Navi, it's just become a map that's really good for them. So actually this was another surprise result. I think a lot of people would have expected Mouse to roll on through, and maybe even when they saw G2 won that, or even saw these semis, expect Mouse to win the tournament. I actually thought they would be the best team at this point of the tournament, because obviously big names like FaZe, Spirit, Vitality, mainly actually Spirit, Vitality, and a little bit of FaZe, they're the teams you expected to be in this semis, but they weren't. So Mouse actually, in theory, got a dream set of semi opponents and then didn't even get through that match themselves. You see, again, bit carries, wonderful carries, decent performance by GL, nothing insane. Actually, not that bad by Immer. Obviously, the problem is Carrigan top fragging is a terrible sign if you are the guys from FaZe Clan. I mean, the idea Carrigan actually outfragged everyone except Wonderful and Bit kind of shows you, like, well, where was everyone else for FaZe? Like, Brokey actually is usually way better than this. Frozen's better than this. Rain, admittedly, is kind of this sort of number, and Rops obviously has been on a slump, but even so, that's pretty terrible, isn't it? Then in the semis, when they played against Mouse, you had Wonderful mega carry. Actually, Bit was just average in this one. Immer actually had his best series, basically. Overall, remember, this was a full 3 maps against the top team, so I actually think this is even a pretty good contribution from him. GL was kind of whatever in this one, but Wonderful just had monster numbers. I mean, look, he has 14 kills more than anyone on Mouse. And Mouse is supposed to be the team with the 4 fraggers and the IGL. In fact, across the page, every player is supposed to, in theory, be able to outfrag, except maybe, debatably, Wonderful slightly better than Torji in that sense. But you go rifle for rifle, most people would say, actually, Mouse should be winning this convincingly. So, big-time win for them there. Even though Mouse players, admittedly, exertion, you probably expect a little bit more. Torji is the AWPer. You can't get that outperformed by the rival AWPer. Brolan, listen, he's not supposed to be the star, but even so, those are terrible numbers for 3 maps. 24 kills over 3 maps. Okay, there's problems there. Then we'll go to the last match was the final. Now, once they made the final, on paper, even though the betting odds said G2, on paper, you should probably have said Navi's a slight favourite in the sense that they're at least an established team. They've had this roster for 10 events now after this one, something like that. Whereas obviously G2, this was their brand new roster with Malbs and Snacks that they supposedly got, less than 2 weeks before this event began. So they haven't had much practice. But with that said, the difference is Navi's winning good games, but G2 was blazing through the tournament. They were having some amazing performances. Look at this, smashing Spirit, barely losing that map. In the semi, convincingly win. Nico was having one of the tournaments of his CS2 career so far. He was smurfing. He was the MVP of this tournament officially. No, I have no problems with that at all, even though I would pick Bit. Modesty wasn't playing as well because of how good he is. Like an average Shiro performance, he was still really good. He still had really good numbers. He just didn't turn up in the final. Actually, Malbs was fragging out despite these weird positions and spots they put him in. Snacks was all right. Hunter was way better than expected. He actually was comparable to CSGO Hunter, even though he wasn't that great in the final. So you come into the final, I'd say it's kind of like a 50-50 because you have the crazy form of G2 and they've also got the honeymoon factor and no one knows what they're working with and they're hybridizing things from Huxley's playbook with whatever Snacks is calling now with insane performances from the Kovac twins. Modesty isn't even as good, but it doesn't matter. Malbs wins you a map here and there, including in the final. So all in all, really hot from G2, and then Navi's just constantly beating the doubters. So you start out, look, they're supposed to beat Furia, but then they're probably not supposed to beat FaZe, they're not supposed to beat Mouse, and I'd say it's more of a coin flip / they should have been a slight favourite. But in this scenario, in fact, if you remember on my live show that I did with King T, I even said I would have bet because they were the underdog on the betting odds, but it's also hard to get bet against a blazing G2 that's just rolling through everyone, isn't it? So I think that's interesting in that sense. Now, what's interesting about that final to me is this could actually have been a G2 2-0. G2 narrowly won Ancient, although, by the way, I actually think Aleksib did a great job getting Navi back into that game, but they barely won it, and mainly because Malbs just had a round or two where he just won the game himself, basically. Then you go to the next map, and it goes 6-6, but I can tell you, G2 was fragging out early, and fragging out was getting them the round wins, and even though, again, this actually reminds me a little bit of when the Huxley first started going crazy at that blast, and then that kind of eats it, they would just win by fragging out. They didn't even look that sick. I mean, mean, admittedly, their T-side where Huxley looked way better than this one from Snacks, but this team was all about fragging. That's all that won them rounds, sometimes even on CT set, and they were heavily relying sometimes on CT rounds in this series. So they got the 6-6 opening on Nuke, but obviously you want more rounds if you're on CT side, right? Then they got 0 rounds on T side. So actually, I thought all 6 rounds, and in some of the rounds they lost, Aleksib was calling this NAVI team into this series. They were going to get 2-0'd. He kept them in the first half, grinded out the 6 rounds despite big players from them, closed it completely in the second half. Then on the decider, just monstered them with 9 fucking T rounds on Inferno. That's not even the map that they like, remember, guys. It's not even one that they enjoy. Monster, admittedly, people like b1t just going supernova, wonderful, playing great, GL having some great performances in this final. So you go look, and in the final itself, Nico's still pretty good. Admittedly, the numbers go down overall because, look, he went like really good on the first map. He was all right on the second. He kind of fell apart on the third, especially when he was on T-side. He went 1-6, unfortunately, which was obviously one of the reasons they couldn't get it going. Then you go and you look overall, right? GL, big time performance. b1t, monster performance. Wonderful, actually, just chilling in the final. Not even that crazy performance, just all right. Aleksib actually fragging out. Imma, all right. So you can see in general over the final, especially considering you could have won the first map, actually very good performance from Navi. I would actually say you could argue this is the best series in like the fact it's a final. This could be a great example of what Navi's capable of. If you wanted to present the best series they've played, this is going to be one of them. This is one where there's no map that's a letdown. There's nothing they do particularly wrong. Sometimes the G2 players frag them and they die as a result. If you watch though, Navi's the one that's in control. They look way better in the X on X situations. The experience shows. I still think there's maybe some comm issues between Imma and certain people in the team. Sometimes Wonderful doesn't always take that Monacy angle and go super crazy. Just things a little bit more by the book. The Riflers obviously can be very streaky in GL and b1t, but they are a quality team. Interestingly enough, this probably establishes more a good flaw for me, but you see it takes above and beyond performances fragging-wise for them to win these tournaments, though. And also for me, Snacks, admittedly it's his first event, but he didn't call a great T-side for my money. Monacy didn't play as hard as you expect. It's a -7 for the final. This is the best player in the world. He was nowhere close and he got actually outshone, I would say, not by Wonderful, but by Navi's Riflers. They massively outshone Monacy. And then, as I said, Hunter had been having a nice tournament to that point. What a terrible fucking time to fall apart completely. 28 kills over 3 maps. So sadly, G2 just didn't actually in the end put up enough fight. But to be fair, if they'd have gotten a couple of those rounds that Aleksib had to masterfully call Navi through on the opening half of Nuke, then I think there's absolutely a world where if you get to like 9 rounds on half there, which I think they were up 6-0 or 6-1 or something, you can win that map and then it's just 2-0. It might have been a 16-14 or a 13-11 or whatever, but you could absolutely have won that map. So actually, Aleksib doing a massive job, not just the fraggers, to get them into that game overall. Now, interestingly enough, is what actually has changed in the map pool of Navi. Because if you remember around the major, one of the things that made their major run so nonsense is they had such a limited map pool. The reason why it would always be 3 maps for Navi is because they would have like their map, but then they would lose the other map, and then it would always be a decider. And the problem was they were one of those teams that had, like 2.5 maps in the pool. Like they had some they could play, and they had some they were really sus on. And so the problem was other teams would just always be picking those ones. And that's why, for example, their G2 series would always go 3 maps. It would always be really close. And people like him clearly performed better on certain maps and way worse on other maps. If you look in just the last 3 months, this is going to be like part of EPL onwards. So it's not the major anymore we're counting here. You go on LAN, then if you look, you already see how different the map pool is. Now suddenly things like Ancient and are actually a key part. Before, Ancient was sus. Ancient was a map they had like 30-something% win rate on going into that semi-final against Navi. So instead, we'll start with Ancient, because we're going to go in alphabetical order here. They're Ancient. Yes, they barely lost to G2 here, but like I say, that was mainly because of fragging from like good players and potentially more skilled players on G2. Aside from that, yeah, they lost to Spirit twice. Spirit is a really good team. I think Spirit, spiritually for me, is the best team in Counter-Strike. It's them or Mouse, and the difference is they can do it under pressure, whereas Mouse doesn't for my money. So I think actually losing to Spirit's no diss there. And aside from those 2 losses to Spirit in this really close final, you win in all the rest. Like there's a real scenario here where you could have won all except 2. And the other ones, look who you beat. It's like not nobody's. Like these are decent teams. So already your Ancient is a lot better. Anubis is a map that they're not playing much. They barely play that. Hasn't been that great for them. But then again, who is flexing hard into that at the moment? DOS 2, obviously, is a new map. Now, in general, that's worked out. It's just the problem is the mouse one is very conspicuous for making them look stupid because they get 13-1, but again, to lose to Spirits, No Dace, FaZe and Astralis, these are quality teams, but with better fragging power in theory than NAVI. You go to Inferno, this is where it gets interesting. Because here's the weirdest thing, is their Inferno is one where they basically haven't played it. They played it in that decider at the major and won it and smashed FaZe. They haven't played it since then. And now in the final, they let it come through the decider and they won convincingly with another nice big win. So that's actually even an interesting aspect. It's even sort of a bit of gamesmanship. They've almost tactically did they keep it in their pocket? Did they want it as a surprise? Had they worked on it, but they weren't certain they were really good? Had they tried to fix some things and they thought people would get a read on them if they played it? It's an interesting question, but it's one for Blade or Aleksib, right? Not for me. So I think the interesting thing for me overall is now when you go to these other maps, because if you go Dust 2, they pick it a little bit themselves. It's up and down. Anubis, they don't play much. They don't play Vertigo ever, obviously. Ancient's got way better. This is where it gets interesting. Because Mirage isn't even something, by the way, that they necessarily go crazy perma-picking. But if you go and look at it now, guys, this has become a very strong map. Like, you go all the way back. They won against FlyQuest. You expect that. They barely lost in OT to FaZe. They got beaten by Heroic, when Heroic was just all right with that, like, newer lineup. And then after that, they're on a 6-game streak. They've won 6 in a row. Look who they've beaten. They've beaten FaZe, Virtus.pro, Spirit, FaZe, Mouse. Who cares about Furia? These are the best teams in the world. Like, these are like top 6, 7 teams in the world, except Furia. And also, you're not just winning close. Like, yeah, these games are close. 13-9, 13-10, 13-10. You have ones here where you're winning 13-4, 13-5. Like, these are big-time wins. So, basically, Mirage has gone from just being like a all-right map. They can pick it if they want. Like, this is potentially the new home for NAVI. That's an interesting detail. Now, admittedly, it's something of a fragger map, so you're going to need your players like the Bits or the Wonderfuls to go off. But it's an interesting thing to look out for. And then the interesting one for me is Nuke. Because at EWC, they got all 4 wins on it. They beat all the teams they played. Furia, FaZe, Mouse, G2, because this was a map picked in every series. But here's the interesting thing. They only picked it once themselves. I think it might even have only been Furia they picked it. All the others were picked by the other team into NAVI, maybe because they had a close game against Furia. And because before that, they were losing most of them. Look, before that, they're losing loss, 4 losses, 5 losses, 6 losses out of 7, and one's a 13-11. So then you get to that point, you go, wait a minute, that's like 6 losses out of 8, and then the 2 wins were 13-11s over Astralis and Furia. So that's why if you're FaZe, Mouse, and G2, you're, hey, maybe we should pick it. Ha, ha, ha. We have got them now. But as you see, it didn't really work out. So the reason that's so interesting to me is when you go back, that was a map that had been a map that had cost them. If you're at EPL, that's costing you. If you're at Dallas, that's costing you. If you're in the Blast Spring Finals, that was costing you as a map. Well, this is a tournament where you won every single iteration of it. Now, again, when we get to the Fluke part, what does history say? Are they that team? Are they him when it comes to now? No, but they were at this one tournament, so implied it probably won't continue on with it. Like, essentially, if you really believe NAVI is the number 1 team in the world, your basis has to start before you even get the players on. They're also like the best Nuke and Mirage team in the world, and that's going to be a map that a lot of people play, so it's going to be in the mix when you go there, and that's how they're going to win. They're going to get 2 of those maps, plus the occasional Dust 2, or they'll pull an Inferno up their arse when they need to, an Ancient sometimes. So that's what you have to believe. Now, I don't really believe that, but okay, fair enough. The problem comes when we look at the performances from the players in NAVI at this tournament. Like, they just beg a belief. So first of all, this is the entire tournament for NAVI. I've got it all selected, so don't worry about these tabs. It's collected for this event. I mean, you can see there, they only played 10 maps, didn't they? Let's go and double check. See, look, it's the right one. Played Furia, FaZe, Mouse, G2, because obviously these were 2 map series and 2 map series. But if you go overall, the problem you have goes like this, right? So Bit is enormous. MVP of the tournament for my money. 1.33 rating, also plays anchor spots. 1.38 kill death. That is fucking bonkers. Plus 51. That means it's like a plus 5 for every map. For a rifler, that's big time to just average that. These are enormous numbers. These are MVP numbers. These are like normally like top 5 player of the world numbers. And Bit normally is not a top 5. So we'll get to that in a second. So let's compare to the last 3 months online of Bit. So he's still top. I mean, the funny thing is here, the actual order is identical. Look, Bit top, Wonderful second, JL third, Imma fourth. Bit top, Wonderful second, JL third, Imma fourth. The problem is the disparity. So 1.133 rating for Bit here at this tournament, normally 1.17. That's pretty big. That's enormous, guys. That means it's like a 0.16 difference. That's enormous. Bit does not play like this usually. Then you go and you look at Wonderfully as a 1.29. Now he's normally second for this team, but barely. And you would say if you look at how they play, he's usually the best player for this team because of what he does with the AWP in the squad. He goes from a 1.29, again, MVP type numbers with massive KD, to he's got a 1.14 and a way more respectable KD. And by the way, notice for people like him and Bit, like their plus minus, like, guys, like 2/3 of it fucking comes from this one event where they just monstered. Then you go down to GL. Now, I always say he's the X factor in their team. He's not supposed to be a star, but he's the guy that can be the big game player and the impact player, win some clutches, have a few maps that are big. You don't expect as much from him, so then when he performs big, which, by the way, I don't think it's like overperformance. He's a guy who just performs like, whatever, 1 out of every 3 or 4 events, he has a big performance. But more crucially, you're looking for a series where he wins you a map. He has one big series in the tournament. That's normally what you want from this guy. So he's got like reasonable numbers at this tournament, nothing too crazy. 1.16, really small in terms of differential and in terms of KD. The problem is you go and look at the last 3 months, that's actually very comparable. The rating's slightly different, kill death's slightly different, but it's not that much. 10 maps there. So we're talking 36 maps over the last 3 months. Then you look at the other two. Imma, actually very comparable, slightly better fragging here, slightly better rating. For Aleksib, slightly better nothing. Oh, slightly better kill to death. That's it. The actual rating was only a tiny bit higher. So the problem you have is the two big names here, and I don't even traditionally consider Bit a true star in NAVI, are way too high. And that's just the last 3 months. If you want to go more, why don't we do this? Why don't we do all of 2024? People are looking for teams of the year, right? So let's compare. Notice how, by the way, when I went from 3 months, look at the numbers. The numbers don't go down that much when I go to all of the year because this is who NAVI is. As I expand out the sample size, I went from 36 maps there to 79 maps. Notice how they stabilise. These numbers stabilise. And by the way, notice someone just dropped all the way. Let's go back again. From number 1, he's called Bit, all the way down to number 3. So already you see, Bit is not the guy he was at this tournament. I'll get into that in a second. So you look for the whole year. Wonderful's at a 1.14 with a better KD. Okay, he's obviously a really good player. The differential's crazy there. He is their best player for my money. GL has, like I say, like what, every 1 out of every 3 or 4 tournaments, he has a big performance, it feels like. So, okay, just not at the level of the major. The major was absurd, the numbers he had for that tournament. So, there you go. Nice rating. Decent kill death, nothing absurd. Nice plus minus overall for the whole year. Bit actually ends up being very respectable. And again, if you're not considering him a star player and you just consider him just your anchor, yeah, these are good numbers. But he's just extremely streaky, as I'll show you in a second, because he was the MVP. 1.12 rating, actually nice kill to death, nice kill to death differential. Imma obviously has struggled, but actually not as much as people make out. It's just that, yes, he's supposed to be like, I mean, you want him to be like your Exertion or a Star Rifle or something like that. He's not really fitting that bill. And then Aleksib is just whatever, but he's obviously a brilliant IGL, isn't he? That's just for this period. I also did do, what about the entire lineup? Because they played 2 LANs at the end of last year when they got Wonderful into the squad. So let's go and look at that. This is for the entire time this lineup has existed, which is 97 maps on LAN. So you have Wonderful all the way up there, but still nothing crazy with the rating, but the kills are really good. Bit, it's a lot more tempered, but overall, over this time, he maintains it. GL goes down because, like, he just wasn't as good at the beginning. And, like I say, he's more of like a series guy than the whole event having, like, anywhere close to MVP numbers. He's a guy who puts you over the top for me. Yeah, he's more of, like, in the 3rd star component. It's actually why in this team would be really good, in my opinion, if you had, like, a Star Rifler instead of Imma. Like, the dream would be a Twists or something like that. If you could have had a player like that, I do really think that or Xantares or something. I do think at that point, you'd have like a star there. You'd have like a star AWP, but just not a true top 5 in the world superstar. Then you'd have like really solid anchor in Bit. You'd have a streaky but good like lurker element in GL. And you'd have one of the best IGLs, even if he's not a great fragger. I think you'd actually have a really strong team. I think that team with like a Xantares or a Twists would be like top 3. I think the only teams like what? Spirit, Mouse, maybe Vitality because you have Zewu, but even that's more like if he goes super, you'd be right in the mix there. You'd be right in the category to battle with Vitality and FaZe for those like 3rd, 4th spots and potentially tournament wins for my money. So that's the entire history of the lineup. Then let's go look at Bit because, and by the way, obviously Aleksib did a great call-in job. Oh, by the way, I should actually mention the coach, Blade, right? First of all, he did that thing that he's been doing the whole time where he only ever posts on Instagram a picture of him holding a trophy, and he now has just put up his 8th picture on Instagram. Remember, he became the coach of NAVI in what, like 2019. What a fucking all-time great coach, right? He's got 8 trophies won in that time span. And obviously we had like a year and a half where there was no bloody lands. Like, this guy's just a gangster. And I do think he has one of the most genius minds for CS ever. Not least because he takes all that experience and all the things he knew and he has updated it with modern stuff. And when you listen to his interviews, what he says isn't arrogance. It comes true. When he talks about their style, what they're doing with their players, how they're trying to improve, the events they're trying to peak for, like gradually like figuring out like edges, things. It might all sound like he's just giving great PR answers, or he's saying what you want to hear, or he's saying something provocative or deflect. He's not. He actually seems like a very earnest and honest guy. And what he's saying works. His blueprint works. Consider he's won tournaments when he had Boomich as IGL, Electronic as IGL, Aleksib as IGL. This guy's just a winner. He's just one of the best coaches. He had Zeus as IGL when they were like a really top team winning tournaments. So, no, he's just a phenomenal coach. Like, this guy actually, you could argue in terms of importance within this NAVI squad, it goes number 1 Blade, number 2, Aleksib, number 3, Wonderful, number 4, I'd probably say GL actually, number 5, Bit, and number 6, Imma. I think that would be like the hierarchy for me if you're looking at who's the most valuable, who does their role the best, who would you keep, who do you build around. So the MVP of this tournament for me is Bit. And by the way, the MVP this tournament gets 50k, which I think is pretty cool. They gave it to Nico officially. I don't hate that. Nico had a fantastic tournament. He was even decent in the final. He just wasn't supernova like he was elsewhere. This was one of the best tournaments he's ever played before that. So I actually think it's not a robbery that he won it and that Bit didn't. But for me, I'm going to go with Bit as the winner. The problem you have is, let's go and look here. So he played 10 maps at this tournament. It's quite a lot. And his numbers are insane. He has a 1.33 rating. These are the kind of numbers I expect from like Donk, by the way. 0.86 kills per round is enormous. This is like best riflers of all time, having some of their better lands. Deaths are fairly low, 0.62. Pretty good plus minus, nowhere near what an AWPer can sometimes have, but obviously pretty good for a rifler. The problem you have is obvious, isn't it? It's that he's only done this 3 times ever. And the kills are much lower in one of those. You had the Blast Spring groups, which isn't a whole lot, it's just the groups. He smurfed that one. Great rating, nice kills. You have ESL Pro League. Funnily enough, it wasn't the major. People will remember in the final of the major, Bit went supernova. Actually, the major itself, he was just carried until that point, or just very average. And then he just came alive in the final after loads of maps. Aside from that, you have the same kills per round as deaths per round, and he did a +1 for the whole fucking major they won. That's why he was nowhere close to the MVP. His rating's not even particularly good. So you had EPL afterwards. He actually smurfed when the rest of Navi dipped and they weren't even vaguely as good as a team. And then he obviously was awesome here. So realistically, you've had 2 proper full lands where he's done this sort of performance ever. And by the way, this is just for 2024. If I go to 2023, those last 2 lands, he was all right for the first one where they had Wonderful, and he was like good for the next one. So if we count all of these, let's just do all time for a second, but we'll be big boys and we'll count it from this point onwards. Realistically, he has 2 really good lands. Then we can say what? That's like half a land. So let's say then like 1.5 pretty good lands. So we're talking what, like 4 and 3.5 pretty good and above lands out of what, 10 lands? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Because this is the RMR. 3.5 out of 10. Spoiler, that number, it would be 35% or something. Well, that isn't 35% of the time you're a star. You're not a star by definition. A star is someone who does it consistently. I would say obviously like 60% or above. So to me, that just shows this is not sustainable. He can't do this. He can't. I even think also, by the way, you could actually have made the case that Wonderful was the MVP too. He just didn't play as crazy in the final as Bit did, and obviously the final counts for a lot of people. So I think already the MVP angle for Bit sort of shows you some of the issues you're going to have, making the case that this is Navi's reasonable level, or they can do this more than every now and then. I mean, they've done this twice so far, that's it. They're at twice out of 10 lands. Although, to be fair, some of those lands weren't ones with finals, so I guess take the RMR out, take the Blast out. So let's say they've done it twice out of 8 events. Aside from that, they've had one other final, and aside from that, they were just a team and also ran in the playoffs. They weren't even some super elite team, were they? In fact, let's go and look at Navi. This is when they got Wonderful. They made the playoffs and just went straight out there. Lost to Cole. This is when Cole was pretty good. Then they went, and the problem is they made semis, but they did lose to the eventual champions, so that could have been better with a different bracket maybe, although to be fair, they were losing to the big teams at the time. Then you came to Katowice, where they were 1 match from the playoffs, but they didn't make it. They lost to Falcons, who now you're all going to say Falcons shit, so that's not a very good result, is it? But crucially, they were the only team to win a map off Spirit, even though it was very close, and took like a 1-on-4 from Wonderful. Then they got to the major, obviously won that, great stuff, even though they had a somewhat easy bracket until they got to the final. Then ESL Pro League, they didn't even make top 8. They lost to FaZe, and FaZe himself actually was already starting to go off the boil there, and they'd lost elsewhere in the tournament to Complexity. IM Dallas, they were actually very underwhelming here. I mean, this is really weak shit. Heroic's not even an elite team right now. Blast Spring final, this was the finals, not the groups, remember? They made it all the way to the final and just got convincingly beaten by Donk and Spirit. And then they had this Esports World Cup they just won now. 2-1 semis, 2-1 final. The problem is, I do think overall, I double down, don't I? The major was a fluke. So was this, in a way. Like I'm saying, it doesn't happen very often. Now, admittedly, if it can happen more than once or twice, that will get me quite interested. Maybe then it's like, it's not as much of a fluke as like you just have 1 in 4 tournaments where people go supernova. Now, I think as you expand the sample size out, you just won't have many of these happen. Like for the rest of the year, my guess would be Navi does this maybe one more time, but just not at like a Cologne or the major. They'll maybe just do it one more time. Maybe it'll be another Blast Finals or another smaller IEM or an ESL or EPL. Maybe they can win one more of those and have Bit go supernova or JL overperform in a couple of series or Wonderful have slightly higher numbers. You don't expect it to be an Emma Performance or an XCB, etc. Obviously, tactically, they're a good team. I think actually the more important conversation probably is Aleksib the best in-game leader in the world? Like, I don't think that's an unreasonable case you could make. You have a look how much it seems he has to do on the T side to get them these wins, and the fact that on CT side, absolutely teams can frag into them. Absolutely. Then you have the whole thing of, I actually think this win overall was easier than winning a major because the major had the whole Swiss system you had to play. Remember, in the major, they actually played Spirit and Cloud9 in best of 3 series in the Swiss system and lost to both of them in that format. That's how tough the run of teams you had to face at the major was. I even think there's similarities between these two runs. Like, first of all, Bit overperformed in the final of the major, but overall here, GL was the one that mega overperformed his numbers at the actual major, and his weren't as crazy here. They had an easier bracket draw, you could argue here. That's debatable now, though. I guess it depends how much you care about G2. Because I would say FaZe has already been off the boil a few months. Mouse, look, they should be better, but obviously we know they can let you down in the playoffs sometimes. And then G2, it's just that weird brand new honeymoon squad, isn't it? Like, I think overall that's a slightly easier bracket because I think on paper the Huxley G2 is better. I don't know, actually. It's debatable because I guess FaZe was supposed to be better at the major, but then Eternal Fire's not. It's kind of a bit of a push. And also, by the way, you do notice of all these lineups, look, FaZe at the major was a big scalp to play. FaZe here's not as big a scalp. Mouse is a fairly big one, but it's not the same way as when FaZe has been all those LAN finals. And obviously, you didn't play Spirit or Vitality. Now, yes, they didn't win their games and get this far, but if you want to have great historic runs, part of it is having massive scalps of enormous names with the best players in. So that just didn't happen at this tournament. So it's not Navi's fault, but again, you can only beat who's in front of you, can't you? Then I also think it's interesting that just like the major, there's a key big series in each of these runs where you get mega dumpstered on a map. So it's like even within your historic inspired run where all this stuff's happening that can never normally happen, it's like there's still one map where you come back down to earth and the other team just absolutely plows you. Like obviously at this tournament, in the semis, the opening map Dust 2 against Mouse, they got absolutely shit on 13-1. And then in the second map, their map pick, Mirage in the final against FaZe, wasn't it like 13-2 or something? They got giga stomped on at the PGL Copenhagen major. I obviously did a Substack piece, which at this point you'd have to pay for because after 2 weeks, all my pieces go behind a paywall, where I broke down, not only I did a column about why this run at the major, the first one, the Fluke, was a fluke. And then I also did a piece that was looking at the 5 teams, I think, including Navi, that fluked majors, which obviously was Fnatic 2013, Gambit 2017, Cloud9 2018, Outsider/Virtus Pro 2022, and then obviously Natus Vincere for 2024 with PGL Copenhagen. Those were my fluke wins overall. With that said, I will say a consideration, I'm thinking about this one a bit more, that Cloud9 lineup never won again. And it wouldn't fuck all important before. Gambit broke up immediately afterwards, but I don't think would have won a big tournament. They hadn't before. Outsider/Virtus Pro never won again with that lineup. And won smaller events even when they made changes. Fnatic never won again with that lineup and eventually made changes and had one of their best ever lineups because they made the change to Crimson Olaf. If you look at Navi after the major, they did make the playoffs of Pro League. They just didn't do very well there. They made 9th to 12th because it has an enormous fucking playoff, doesn't it? Then they had IM Dallas where they were finished 9th to 12th and just were irrelevant. They had Blast Spring, they made the final, were on a little bit of a heater, but then got absolutely clapped in the final. They won the Esports World Cup before the major. Obviously, when they first made their lineup, they had the 5th to 6th with... when they first got Wonderful in, which wasn't that great. Like I said, the Blast World one actually is probably undervalued because they lost to Vitality. And then losing to Falcons is a bomber at Katowice, but that was the best that Falcons ever looked ever. And that was even when Boris was kind of smurfing a little bit. So, but not that great. So at 8 tournaments, they've had 3 finals, won 2 titles, and they failed to make the playoffs something like 2 times. And to be fair, 2 of those, like whatever, 5 times they made the playoffs was at the beginning of the pre-2024 when they just got Wonderful in, but then all the other teams were a bit scuffed too. Like FaZe was just bringing in Frozen. Mouse was working with Brolan at that point in time. Vitality was in their zenith, but everyone else wasn't as good. There was no Spirit at that time, at least we're not with fucking Shiro in, not the lineup you recognise now. So my trouble is the numbers are just way too high. Wonderful's number is higher than ever. Bitter's number is way too high for it to be sustainable. Jail's is higher, but he is usually roughly around that level of how good he is. Also then, there's another factor, which is the team fragging number. This is an angle a lot of people don't notice, but I like to track this because it really tells you when teams have overperformed in a way that's just not plausible. We'll start at this tournament they just won, the Esports World Cup 2024. So look, ignore this team because they actually only played one map, a BO1, and they just lost it, but all fragged out, right? So who cares about that one? NAVI is, aside from that BS team, the highest ranked tournament in the team in the tournament with fragging. They have a 1.16 rating. Now, what you're going to find is NAVI never gets anywhere close to that ever. So already, this one tournament is the greatest outlier overall in their entire time to go with this lineup. Like, I'll go back and let's look at this should be the major. When they won the major, they weren't even on this top 10, by the way. Is it? Or top 8. They weren't even top 8. So remember, 1.16 to win Esports World Cup, but as a team, they were 1.02 with 0.97 and minus. They had more deaths than kills in that tournament because it was a really long, large sample size tournament with 18 maps. EWC was like 10 maps. So they just aren't that team. That's that crazy fraggers. That is one thing you categorically can say about NAVI is firepower is not one of their biggest strengths. So at this tournament, they were crazy, absolutely crazy, above every other team, even a mega squad like Mouse, even like Spirit with their firepower, G2 with players going crazy. Doesn't matter. None of that matters. And this is totally unsustainable. So what we'll do is we'll go through the other events. We'll go backwards in time. When they were at that Blast final, they made the final, remember guys? 1.09. So a lot as a team off a 1.16 rating. And as you'd expect, teams like Spirit, Astralis, Vitality are better fraggers than you. Yeah, that makes sense. Then you go back to IM Dallas where you bombed. You're not even in the top 8 again. Remember, 1.16 is what you had here. You had a 0.92 at that event. Then let's go to ESL Pro League where Bit smurfed. Oh, you're Bit smurfing. Yeah, you're 7th at 1.09. So still far off a 1.16. Then you go back. PGL Copenhagen, like I said, you have to go all the way down to a 1.02. Then you go to IM Katowice, they're 1 series from making the playoffs. They're 7th, 1.05, way off a 1.16. Then you had Blast World Finals, they're 4th. This was a really good run, they could have made the final, 1.06. Similar, 10 maps. Then you had the first tournament where you had Wonderful. You actually did really well, but still 1.08, which wasn't that great a fragging tournament over 8 maps. Now, let's just look at something else quickly. Here's why the numbers here aren't sustainable for NAVI. So first of all, they have a 1.16 rating. Let's look at some of the other event winners. So Spirit won that event with Donker's MVP, 1.14 rating. This event was one where IM Dallas was won by G2. They didn't even make the list in terms of fragging, but Spirit did an all right run. Vitality obviously did a really good run to the final. They had 1.15. So Vitality making the final had a lower rating than this win from NAVI. Then you go here. ESL Pro League was obviously won by Mouse Sports. They had a 1.22 rating, even higher, but they're a way better team. Like Mouse, Astralis, Vitality. These are teams, Spirit. These are teams you expect to be able to frag out. You do not expect NAVI to. They are not that team. You go back when they won the major. The best fragging team was Mouse, who made the quarters. Spirit made the quarters, 1.13. G2 made it all the way to the semis. They're only a 1.11. Vitality made the semis. They're a 1.09. FaZe made the final and had an awesome run at 1.07. So way off a 1.16. You go to Katowice. Spirit dominated. Yeah, 1.25 is crazy, right? You aren't Spirit. You don't have Donk and Shiro. Neither of your players are as good as that. You might have a better IGL. Even teams like Mouse, Fate, look how low the numbers go in comparison. Then those last two blasts, Vitality won it with a 1.21. But that's Vitality. That's Vitality with Ziwu, Spinks, Flames. These guys are monsters. And then you do the first blast 4-1 by Vitality at the exact same rating that Navi has now for this event. So it just doesn't check out. It won't continue. It's not plausible. Now, I do think there's a more interesting discussion you can have that goes, how good is Navi? Like, forget, are they the best? Was the major... Let's just go, how good is Navi? Because I would say this is the interesting details. Because if your metric is the team results and we're evaluating who had the best placings, then on paper, they're the best team of the year, right? In 2024, they won the major, the biggest event, and then they won, like... Listen, in terms of like difficulty and prestige, Katowice is better than this event, but this event had a lot of prize money. It had all the top teams. So you've won the major, the biggest event, and like what? Like, let's say like the fourth best event of the year so far or something. So that's pretty good. That probably puts you number one. And then you had the Blast final. So overall, in terms of placings, you're probably the number one team of the year so far in terms of the resume, right? The problem is, if you look with your eye test at how they play, who performed how, what's consistent, what's replicable, and how they play every single tournament. Like I say, I don't think spiritually you would say Navi's the best team right now. Again, make a roster move, we can have a different conversation there. I think you would probably look, and I would say Spirit is probably the best team because they won Katowice, they had one blast, they were in that Bet Boom final, they've basically been top 8/playoffs of almost every tournament they've been in. They're just generally a very strong team. They have the odd top 4 in there. They're just overall, it's like the consistency. And you just watch the eye test. They're fantastic as a squad. And their numbers are replicable from their stars. In Donk, in Shiro, even Zontix adds in. It's kind of like hit their GL of their team to some degree. FaZe obviously had the Chengdu title and 2 finals, but after that, they've just been making playoffs, that's it, and they haven't been as crazy. Obviously, eye test-wise, some of those runs look better maybe than Navi over the year. That's more debatable on that one. Vitality has no titles, but I think eye test-wise over the year is better than this squad, because obviously their 2 titles were the Blasts at the end of last year. They obviously also did make the final at IEM Dallas and EPL, so, I mean, again, this is all debatable. I would say this is the thing. If I asked you, this is the question. So the next event that comes up, it's going to actually be Blast in this case, but if it was an event with just all the best teams, if I said to you, of all these teams I just listed, who is most likely to win? So I had Navi, Spirit, FaZe, and Vitality. Who's most likely to win the event out of those 4 teams? If we're being absolutely honest, thinking about the eye test and all factors, wouldn't you pick Navi 3rd out of those 4, if not 4th? Wouldn't you have Spirit first? Probably even Vitality, if we're talking right this second, as who would win the next event. But if I throw a Mouse in there, surely Navi comes down to 4th or 5th. Maybe a Mouse, if you think they can win it. After that, I mean, people might say FaZe has fallen off, so maybe debatably you have FaZe. I think some people might even pick FaZe consistency-wise to outplace Navi. I don't know at that point in time. So I feel like that's the problem. And let's be real, one of the reasons why is some of those other teams have superstars or just stars that you can heavily rely on. Like, here's the difference. Maybe for FaZe, they don't. Maybe for Mouse, they don't, but the difference is Mouse has a deeper team. Mouse has a deep team of people who can be the star and the MVP. FaZe, you could probably say overall, in terms of the impact he's going to have on the game, that maybe Wonderful's better than Frozen in terms of what he's consistently going to output. I don't know, and obviously Frozen isn't the craziest fragger in the world, just a really strong player who has his defined style. But if you look at the other squads, it's night and day, isn't it? Like, Zemo already claps anyone on Navi. Monacy on G2 claps anyone. In fact, Nico's getting to the point where in theory he might be able to outperform most of the Navi players. Spirit has Donk, who mega claps these players from Navi overall. And then Shiro, quite frankly, is better than Wonderful and the rest of Navi. So I think actually, yeah, you're in a tough spot. These teams have players where it makes sense as to why the eye test checks out. And they are the best teams overall. So I think it's dope. I actually am a big fan of Navi. People won't understand that. I'm a fan of Aleksib. I actually think JL's game's kind of interesting to observe. I've actually enjoyed Wonderful ever since Sprout. And fuck that, Team Spirit, actually. I thought he was mega in Team Spirit. I never understood how Sprout used him. I always thought this guy should have been on a top team. He's just like 90% of what Dexter is. I think Dexter's a fucking phenom. You obviously have Immer, who I enjoyed on Game of Legion, but he's been a bit wacky. Bit was a very good player in 2021 and for parts of 2022. He just is very streaky now and is playing more of a specialised role. I just wish they had an aggressive rifle star, and then they would really have what they need to be a truly elite team and contend for every title. Everyone needs a support network, and mine is, of course, my Patreon community, the Scrominati, who in many ways, they're the Sonny to my Cher, saying, I got you, babe. So this video and all the others on my channel were kindly supported by the following names: Ahmed Hadjou, Mac Pugnatio Rajcula, Adam Tomlin, Animosity, Jensen Goh, Tosh, Thorin, and you know it. Jerky's Minion, my main man, always going to be referenced, one of the best patrons of all time. Would you like to ask a question in my AMA? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest to say on my channel. Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming Reflections and Talk to Thorin interviews are. Maybe you want to do one of those long discussions where you get to set the topics we talk about. Well, if any of these or others appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Scluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.